The moment Emily walked into the hospital room, she didn't expect her life to turn upside down by morning. She was just doing her job, routine vitals chart updates, a quick IV bag replacement. But what she stepped into felt like something straight out of a psychological thriller. The patient seated on the hospital bed with wild hair and crayon drawings all over his arms pointed directly at her and said, "Mommy, I want to marry this nurse. She smells like bubble gum." The air froze. It wasn't just the absurdity of the statement, it was the fact that it was coming from a fully grown man. Ryan Anderson, 36, diagnosed with trauma-induced delusional disorder, millionaire heir to the Anderson estate, and now apparently a 5-year-old trapped in an adult body. But there was something deeper than the bizarre behavior. Something about the way he tilted his head, the way he grinned with too much calculation, and the way his eyes flicked to the elegantly dressed woman sitting in the corner, his stepmother Veronica. Cold, calculated, graceful, everything about her screamed control. And when she stood up and approached Emily with that perfect saccharine smile, it became painfully obvious Ryan wasn't just mentally unstable. He was imprisoned in a carefully crafted illusion. Emily tried to brush off the moment. "I'm just here to adjust the IV," she said with forced calm, but her hands trembled. Not because Ryan's behavior was childish, it was because in the split second their eyes met, he wasn't acting like a child at all. He was focused, too focused. Now let's pause here. Why would a grown man allegedly mentally unstable fake being a child? And more importantly, why would a wealthy family with all their resources allow such behavior to continue unchecked? These are the kinds of situations that make you realize that money doesn't just buy comfort, it can also buy silence, illusion, and even compliance. In real life, we've seen similar situations. Remember the case of Dee Day and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. A mother fabricated illness after illness to control her daughter, even convincing the public and doctors that Gypsy was disabled and terminally ill. But in reality, she was fully capable, held prisoner by manipulation, deception, and a crafted reality. What happened in that hospital room felt eerily similar. Back to the story, Veronica leaned in close to Emily and whispered, "Don't mind him, dear. Ryan has his good days and bad days. We just play along. It's easier that way." And just like that, Emily was dismissed, like a tool, like a pawn. But that night, everything changed. Emily received an unusual request to administer Ryan's medication personally, alone, after midnight. No questions asked. That's a red flag in any clinical setting, but she went. She was curious, disturbed, and deeply unsettled. As she opened the door to his room, she stopped cold. Ryan wasn't in bed. He was kneeling on the floor facing the wall. The room was eerily silent except for the faint buzzing of a ceiling light and the soft clink of her tray. The walls, once sterile and white, were now covered in drawings, all of them of her. Crude sketches in crayon showing her smiling, crying, even sleeping. That's not the kind of behavior you expect from a true psychotic episode. This was obsession, deliberate, premeditated. Then he spoke, quietly, slowly. "People say crayons are for kids, but sometimes crayons tell truths pens can't." Emily approached cautiously, pretending to go through the motions of medication prep. But before she could touch the IV line, Ryan grabbed her wrist not violently, but with calm strength, and locked eyes with her. This time there was no confusion, no childish grin, no babble, just laser-sharp clarity. "I'm not insane," he whispered. "Please, I need your help. Everything they told you, it's all a lie." Now here's the thing, if this were a movie, you'd assume the guy's playing her, manipulating her to escape. But Emily had been trained to recognize both delusion and clarity. And this was clarity. Desperate, exhausted, terrified clarity. He explained it all in a rush. 6 months ago, he was in a car crash. His stepmother and her son were supposed to be with him, but at the last moment they changed plans. His car's brakes failed. The driver died. Ryan barely survived. And by the time he woke up, the narrative was already in place. He was mentally unwell. The will had changed. Veronica had power of attorney. His inheritance was locked behind a diagnosis. This might sound like a Hollywood plot twist, but unfortunately, real-life parallels aren't rare. Conservatorship abuse, like what Britney Spears endured for over a decade, shows just how easily legal systems can be weaponized by those in power under the guise of protection. Once you're labeled incompetent, regaining autonomy becomes a nearly impossible uphill battle. Ryan continued, "The last nurse, she vanished. Transferred, they said. But she left everything behind, books, clothes, even her cat." Emily's blood ran cold. He needed someone to help him gather proof, someone Veronica hadn't already bought. And he believed that person was her, not because she was brave, not because she was smart, but because she stayed even after seeing the madness. The next morning, the game changed again. Ryan, back in full childish mode, spun around the Manor's parlor in a blanket cape and abruptly declared, "I want to marry Emily. She gives the best hugs and smells like cake." It was surreal. Veronica's face barely twitched, but Emily saw the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. Ryan's tantrum turned violent, just like the file said it would, screaming, threatening to break windows if they didn't allow the wedding. And just like that, Veronica agreed. A symbolic ceremony. No legal paperwork, just enough to calm the unstable air. But let's be honest, this wasn't about love. This was about control, about illusion. Veronica needed to maintain the illusion of power, of stability, and Ryan knew exactly how to play her own game against her. Later, in the privacy of his room, Ryan laid it out. "Once you wear that dress, she thinks she owns you, that you're hers. But we'll flip the script." They staged the perfect ceremony. Emily wore a simple white dress designed to mimic both a wedding gown and a nurse's uniform. Ryan wore a crooked smile and an unkempt tux. They stood in the Manor's greenhouse, surrounded by staff who clapped like paid actors. But when the officiant asked Ryan if he had any words, he leaned in and whispered into Emily's ear, "I will protect you, no matter how far this goes." That wasn't a line from a script. That was a promise. And Emily, still unsure what she was walking into, knew one thing for certain: she wasn't acting anymore. This was real. This was dangerous. And she was now officially inside a web of lies that had already destroyed at least one person before her. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey. The greenhouse smelled faintly of damp moss and roses, but beneath the floral sweetness, Emily could sense the rot, the deception, the control, the twisted performance they were all silently participating in. As she stood beside Ryan, the man who pretended to be a child in public and a trapped, calculating survivor in private, she realized the real ceremony taking place wasn't a wedding. It was an initiation. She wasn't being welcomed into a marriage, she was being drawn into a war. After the symbolic adieu, guests clapped and chuckled. The officiant barely looked up from his note cards. Ryan gave a theatrical bow, still bouncing like a child. But when he turned toward Emily, the mask slipped for just a second. The corners of his mouth twitched, but his eyes, those eyes were sharp, grounded. The hand he placed on her arm was deliberate, warm, and steady. Behind the performance, there was a man fighting for survival, and Emily had just become his only ally. As they walked away from the ceremony past the staff and silent portraits lining the estate walls, Emily's thoughts spiraled. She had come to this job expecting long hours and thankless routines, not espionage, not manipulation, and certainly not staged marriages. Yet something about Ryan pulled her in. Not in a romantic way, not yet, but in the way survivors recognize each other. She didn't know the full story yet, but she knew pain when she saw it. Real pain. Lived pain. Pain that didn't need to shout because it was written in every movement, every breath. Later that evening, they sat in the estate's library. Rain tapped against the windows and the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows. It was the first time since the ceremony that Ryan dropped the act completely. He stood at the mantel, not swaying, not mumbling, but speaking like a man who'd carried secrets for too long. "I need to tell you why I pretended," he said, voice low. "Why I act like a child when people are around." Emily didn't interrupt. She sat quietly watching the man who had been branded insane peel away the layers of his trauma like a surgeon with a scalpel. "My father died 8 months after marrying Veronica," he began. "They said it was a heart attack, but he was in the best shape of his life. A runner, organic eater, no history of heart issues. And then 2 weeks before his death, he changed his will. Gave her and her son majority control. I was named executor, but it was a title with no power. It was just ceremonial." He paused, staring into the fire as if searching for answers in the dancing flames. When I confronted her, she smiled and said, "You should be grateful. I gave you a future. You just have to know your place." He scoffed. 2 weeks later, my brakes fail. My driver dies. I survive. Barely. It wasn't paranoia. It was a pattern. This scene felt all too familiar to anyone who's read about financial manipulation in powerful families. Like the infamous case of Brooke Astor, a wealthy philanthropist whose own son was convicted of elder abuse and fraud to gain control of her estate. Greed isn't exclusive to criminals in alleyways. It often dresses in designer suits and lives behind white gates. Ryan continued, "I woke up in a private facility. Everyone treated me like I was broken. I didn't even have a chance to protest. The moment I tried to speak up, they increased the medication. They called it a psychotic episode. I realized the only way to survive was to play their game, pretend to be the puppet, because as long as I was harmless, I was alive." Emily's chest tightened. She understood now. The crayons, the babble, the fake tantrums. They weren't madness. They were a survival mechanism. "I needed time," he said. "Time to figure out who I could trust. And then you showed up." Emily blinked. "Me, I didn't know if I could trust you either," he admitted. "But you didn't look at me like I was broken. You looked scared, sure, but you stayed. That meant something." She remembered that moment when he first grabbed her wrist, eyes clear and pleading, when he whispered, "Help me." She had nearly run then, but something kept her rooted. Maybe it was empathy, maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the very human drive to right a wrong. Emily stood, her heart pounding. "She used me," she said, voice low. "She chose me for this role. She told me you needed someone gentle, someone to observe you, report back to her. And I believed her." Ryan nodded. "She's good at choosing pawns. Young, smart, but isolated. People who need the money, who are too distracted to notice the trap until it's closed around them." And he was right. Emily had taken the job because it paid well, required minimal clinical tasks, and came with housing. No family, No attachments. She had been the perfect recruit. Her fists clenched. Not anymore. I'm not playing along. He looked up, something flickering in his eyes. Not hope exactly, something more dangerous. Trust. I'm with you, she said. Not because I'm being used, because I've been used, and I won't let it happen again. They sat in silence for a long time, two strangers bound not by romance or coincidence, but by shared resistance. And then the garden party was announced. It was meant to be a distraction, a performance of wealth, power, and legacy. Guests in cocktail dresses and designer suits floated through manicured lawns, sipping champagne and commenting on how adorable Ryan looked in his suit and fidget toy. But behind the scenes, the trap was being set. Ryan had slipped a recording device into the lining of his jacket. His goal to catch Michael Veronica's son saying anything that hinted at the crash or the manipulation. And Michael didn't disappoint. Emily, dressed in an ivory gown Veronica herself had picked, was approached by the drunk heir as he swirled a third glass of whiskey. Still playing nursemaid to the baby millionaire, he chuckled. She smiled politely. He keeps me entertained. Michael leaned in, reeking of arrogance and alcohol. Crazy, right? A little nudge down the right road, and boom, inheritance chaos. Shame it only half worked. That was it. The confession. Sloppy but damning. Behind the bushes, Ryan sat quietly listening. The recorder blinked silently. Earlier that day, they had planned every moment. If I can get him to say anything, anything that connects him to the crash, we'll have a shot, Ryan had said. And Veronica, Emily had asked. She won't confess. But if she loses control, even for a second, it could be enough. That second came soon after. Emily approached the stepmother at the champagne table. Cool and poised as ever, Veronica sipped from her flute like a queen holding court. I heard rumors, Emily said gently, that the crash wasn't an accident. Veronica didn't flinch. Rumors are for bored minds. But you did switch cars at the last minute. The mask slipped just slightly. You're asking dangerous questions, she said, voice sharp as broken glass. Be careful who you align yourself with. Then, without breaking eye contact, she added, Ryan was a complication. If fate relieved us of that, who are we to argue? Later that evening, the final act began. Dinner was served. The guests gathered, and Ryan stood to give a toast. To my wife, he said, still playing the role. She gave me cookies, laughter, but then he turned serious. And to my family, to the mysterious death of my father, to the sabotaged brakes on my car, to the fortune that suddenly changed hands. Silence. He pulled the recorder from his jacket and pressed play. Michael's drunken voice echoed through the garden. Getting rid of the air is a hell of a move. Gasps. Then Veronica's cold voice. If fate relieved us of that, who are we to argue? Phones came out. The lawyer stood white-faced. Michael lunged, screaming, but Emily stepped in front of Ryan. Touch him and I swear security tackled Michael. Police were already on the way. Veronica's world shattered in an instant. You think this changes anything? She snarled. Ryan met her gaze, finally fully himself. It already has. Have you ever had a moment where pretending led to something unexpectedly real? Please comment below and like this video. If you believe the best love stories start with honesty, subscribe our channel now for more powerful story-based videos every day. The flashing lights painted the estate in red and blue as if the truth itself had burned away, the years of secrets layered into its walls. Officers moved quickly. Veronica was escorted out of her marble-floored kingdom, with a silk scarf still draped elegantly over her shoulder. but gone was the poise. In its place, a grimace that couldn't quite conceal her panic. Michael, furious and flailing, was shoved into a squad car, shouting something about how this wasn't over. But it was. Inside, the staff exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. Conversations that had always been whispers in hallways became full voices. People started smiling genuinely, not out of fear. And Ryan, the man once thought mad, was finally seen for what he truly was, a survivor who played the long game and won. The press caught wind of it within 24 hours. Headlines labeled him the heir who outsmarted madness. Public sympathy rallied behind him, and lawyers quickly worked to reinstate his legal authority over the estate. But Ryan had no interest in the spotlight. He turned down every interview, ignored every media request. Fame didn't appeal to him. He had lived under a microscope long enough. There was only one thing he still needed to do. One quiet morning, as sunlight filtered through the fog and dew kissed the hedges, he knocked gently on Emily's door. She opened it in a robe, her hair a soft mess sleep, still clinging to her eyes. For a second, she didn't recognize the man in front of her. No wild hair, no crayon marks, no fidget toys or childlike antics. Just Ryan, clean shirt sleeves rolled calm in a way she'd never seen before. He held a basket in one hand, not flowers, not gifts, just two thermoses of coffee and a warm cinnamon bun wrapped in a napkin. "Come with me," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. She didn't ask where. She just followed. They walked past the old estate, now quiet and almost unfamiliar, without the weight of secrets hanging in the air. Down a narrow gravel path through a grove of ancient oak trees, leaves whispered above them like they were holding their breath. Eventually they came to a crumbling stone wall. Vines crept over it and moss covered the gate hinges. Ryan pushed the gate open with a groan of rusted iron. On the other side was a hidden garden, overgrown but breathtaking. Wildflowers bloomed in defiance. Cobblestones peeked from beneath the grass. Arches once wrapped in roses now wore ivy like armor. "My father brought me here when I was a kid," Ryan said, stepping through as though into memory. "Before everything changed. Before the masks. This was where he taught me to breathe again." Emily wandered slowly through the space, the scent of old wisteria clinging to the breeze. It felt like a world forgotten, untouched by the lies of the estate. He said it was magic. Ryan continued sitting on a weathered bench beneath tangled vines. Said when the world got too loud, this place reminded him who he was. He looked at her. No performance, no shadows, just Ryan. "I faked insanity to stay alive, Emily. I buried myself in weakness because I didn't know how else to survive. But you pulled me out. You believed me when no one else did. You looked at me and didn't see a problem to manage. You saw a man." Emily felt her eyes sting. She reached out and held his hand. "Because you were worth saving," she whispered. Ryan stood slowly and set the basket at his feet. From inside, he pulled out a small velvet box. "I never thought I'd do this here," he said, "but I can't think of a place more honest." He knelt. Emily gasped. This was not part of any plan. No lies, no games. "Just me. Just us," he said, opening the box. Inside was a simple ring, elegant and understated, like everything real in life usually is. "Emily, will you marry me? Truly marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief, joy, relief. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him into an embrace. In that moment, everything fell away. The estate, the secrets, the titles, the trauma. There were no more disguises. Only two people scarred and still healing, but finally free. They left the city with no press conference, no goodbye gala, no final word to the vultures circling their old life. Just a packed car, a map, and a destination that didn't appear on any GPS. The farmhouse they settled into was old but strong, surrounded by gentle hills and a silver river that curved around the back like a ribbon. The place smelled like wild lavender in spring and wood smoke in autumn. Emily opened a small clinic in the front of the property, just 2 rooms and a porch. No reception desk, no waiting number system. People came when they needed care. Some paid, some didn't. No one was turned away. Ryan built shelves, handled phone calls, and organized the medical cabinets with meticulous care. He became the unofficial receptionist, accountant, and handyman. Once Emily joked that he was probably running a secret empire behind the scenes. He laughed the real kind. Not forced, not defensive, just laughter. That was how she knew he had changed. "You're different here," she told him one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset behind golden hills. "I feel different," he replied. "I think I was always waiting for someone to believe in me, enough to let me be real." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You're more than real. You're finally whole." And for the first time, he believed it. They had no staff, no guards, no polished silverware. Just fresh eggs from their chickens, laughter from the neighbors, and a life that felt lived. Time passed quietly. One late autumn evening, after they had fed the animals and closed the clinic, Ryan led Emily down a worn path behind the house. The sky burned with rose and amber. The river below mirrored the fading light. He turned to her and said, "Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you?" She laughed. "How could I forget? Mommy, I want to marry this nurse." He chuckled. "And now here we are." She smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "You've come so far." He nodded, eyes distant. "I used to think surviving meant hiding, staying small enough to stay unnoticed. But now I know. Survival means finding someone worth being seen for." She looked at him, heart full. "You were always worth seeing." And in that final moment, the last performance ended. No more masks. No more pretending. Just 2 souls who had lost everything only to find each other. The lesson here isn't just about resilience. It's about clarity. About how sometimes playing the part others expect from us is the only way to outlast the storm. But once the clouds part and someone finally sees through the performance, we have a choice: stay hidden or come alive. Ryan chose life, chose truth, chose love. And in doing so, he reminded us all that sometimes the most broken people are only waiting for someone to believe in them, to give them a reason to rise. So if you've ever felt invisible, trapped by someone else's narrative, or forced to perform for survival, remember this: you are not what they call you. You are what you choose to become. And somewhere out there, someone is waiting to see the real you. Don't hide forever. Be seen. Thanks for staying with us until the end. If this story moved, made you think, consider sharing it with someone who might need it today. Subscribe our channel for more powerful stories about love, self-growth, and human connection, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next emotional journey.